Real men don't cry. Pain is a sign of weakness. In modern society, people often use the term toxic masculinity to describe exaggerated masculine traits that many cultures have widely accepted or glorified. This harmful concept of masculinity also places significant importance on manliness based on strength, lack of emotion, self-sufficiency, dominance, and sexual virility. According to traditional toxic masculine values, a man who does not display enough of these traits may fall short of being a real man. It wasn't until the 1980s and 1990s when these traditional male behaviors became incompatible with the views of contemporary society. So how does toxic masculinity relate to mental health throughout a man's life? We will explore this with 3 different men who came from different walks of life. The birthplace of toxic masculinity starts from a young age. Men are taught to suppress their feelings in fear that showcasing these feelings will threaten their masculinity. This ends up affecting them, especially during their adolescence, because since they fail to open up about their traumatic experiences and emotions, it not only can affect their mental health, but can also lead to teenage males feeling depressed and suicidal.
So my childhood was a little tumultuous. I grew up in a very strict European-styled household.
Grew up in a fractured home. My father was an abusive man. He was arrested when I was 8 years old and removed from our home. And shortly after his departure, my mom was diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah, it was a strict household, but it was pretty much the same for all the kids that were raised in the 70s.
Well, discipline for me was a lot of physical interaction, whether it was a belt or a spoon or backhands.
I was raised incredibly strict, especially from my father. He came from an era of, men don't cry, you don't show weakness, men have to be the column or the pillars in the family.
With my mother having certain ideals of how a boy or a man should behave with respect to stoicism, sort of curtailing of certain emotions.
It was very violent discipline. My dad looked at discipline as there's a reaction for every action, and that usually was in the form of spankings, either with belt or hand. My mother also was, corporate discipline type, usually wooden spoons, or she would psychologically just say, wait until your father got home, and, I understood what that meant. I remember many a time sitting, looking out the window, just fearing for my father's truck to pull into the driveway.
I think my childhood set me up for certain pitfalls later in life in that I wasn't allowed to address anything introspectively that was going on. I wasn't allowed to explore those feelings and emotions openly.
I think it kind of became my downfall in a way because I really took that to heart and I really enveloped the whole ideology of what I was brought up with. So as I went down this path, it was, you suck it up, you don't talk about what's bothering you, you just keep going.
That mentality carried forward, right into my teenage years. And I think between the corporal punishment of my parents and the mentality of not being beat up again, it didn't become about defense for me, but offense. Young men who conform to traditional definitions of manhood are more likely to suffer harm to themselves or do harm to others. Some scary statistics of young men suffering from severe toxic masculinity include 44% having thoughts of suicide in the past 2 weeks, 56% having perpetuated verbal bullying in the past month, and 31% drink to the point of getting drunk once per month or more. These toxic masculinity individuals are way more likely to suffer from poor mental health.
So the thing is about being in that particular scene, the whole sex, drugs, booze, and metal is a real thing, and that's really what you go through.
I would have to say at the beginning, I did play hockey. I was known for my fists, not my skill. I had a lot of anger in me. I remember that. Fights off the ice, I would literally black out.
There are certain aspects within, especially being in the military, where importance of operation comes first. After said operation or said incident, you decompress in your own way. A lot of it comes down to alcohol, because you go somewhere and you have a bunch of beers together, and you generally just don't talk about it. You're just going to have some beers and feign having a good time.
The way I was raised kind of led me to go with the whole, I'm not going to talk to you about it. I'm going to keep this to me. I'm just going to drink more. I'm just going to do more drugs, and I'm going to forget about it and bury it.
Just felt that I couldn't let people know that I was feeling the way I was feeling, especially some of the dark thoughts, the hurtful thoughts, the painful thoughts. When I was alone and everybody was in bed, I would eat. Also does not help with, it doesn't help with your image. You feel bad when you're overweight, and it feeds into all of that pain. But I just kept hiding it, and I don't know why.
On a tour that I was on, I took some really bad drugs in Vancouver, and I overdosed. And when I woke up, I had a tube in my throat, and I was in a hospital room. And it was that moment in time where I realized I really had a problem with drugs and alcohol, and I needed to do something about it.
My breaking point came at the end of many, many bad decisions, drinking and driving, being drunk at work, showing up to work drunk.
Just because a man has identified that he has an issue, usually mental health is the furthest thing from his mind. Too many think they are supposed to be strong or macho all the time, even when in pain. For many, it would be unimaginable, intolerable for anyone to know that they were battling anxiety, depression, or bogged down by their emotions. But for most men, it just becomes too much. Started with my divorce from my first wife. To further punish myself, I walked away from my marriage by literally giving everything to my wife. I just felt like I needed to have that type of a blow to me, that I deserved that, starting all over. I felt very lonely after that, and in a critical stage of my life, the two mentors I had was my grandfather and father. They passed away within 5 years of my divorce, and I lost them both. And I felt very alone.
I almost lost my life. And that's when I really realized something was wrong. And that's kind of when I really found out that something up here wasn't working the way it should be.
My upbringing limited my ability to seek help in that Like I said before, feelings of being worthy, what I was feeling, having any worth or any merit. And when you have that negative self-disposition, it's really tough to, even if you're feeling bad and low and terrible about yourself, it's tough to go, hey, I should look into this and I should get some help.
For years prevented me from doing it because it became the mentality of you don't talk, you just deal with it, you just fight through, that's what the men do.
So it was funny, even though I was feeling all these physical things and I knew I needed to get help, it's this, even to this day, it's still this constant battle in my mind where, that years of programming, I've been programmed for literally 40, 50 years of my life. And all of a sudden you identify like, wow, these things are wrong with me and I know I can't fix them myself. But that 50 years of programming still kicks in. And it's so frustrating. It's like you're literally battling yourself. And, that's also a part of the sickness is, for people that don't understand mental health, that this thing becomes your enemy.
After my mom had passed away and I had the discussion with my therapist about having an issue with alcohol, she had said, hey, there's this program and it's designed for trauma and addictions, and I'd like to enroll you into it. It's a 9-week program where you go and stay at the facility. And I was resistant to it at first for a few different reasons. I think trepidation was a big one, and I think the other one was naivety and thinking that, I've admitted I have a problem, I can fix it now. And it's not always the case. Sometimes you do need a little help, and after some failed attempts at stopping my drinking, I acquiesced and I went into the program, and things really turned around for me.
My ex-wife, who was my wife obviously at the time, was in the hospital, and she was really angry, and she told me about my son who was about to be born. And it was that moment I decided I had to get help.
My family doctor finally looked at me and said, do you think this could be something mental? And I remember my first reaction was almost disgust. Like, how could you say that? That this has been, my strongest trait. I was a biologist, I was a business executive, and then, he looked at me and said, no, Dean, there's nothing wrong with you. We think this might be something mental health, not physical health. And I was almost in disbelief, but at the same time, having a science-based mind, I realized that if it's nothing physical, it has to be something mental.
Toxic masculinity is something that I think still pervades my thinking space from time to time, perhaps not as often as it once did. And I still have triggers from PTSD, from certain events and dealing with kids. And there are times where I'm impacted by something, and instead of being transparent and open and honest with my partner about it, the immediate thing I do is I hide inward and I dismiss it, and I start saying all those things again, that I'm just being oversensitive, I'm being overreactive, and I'm invalidating how I'm feeling, because in those moments I just have to be I have to be the man of the house. I have to try and fulfill that role, at least in my mind. That's how it feels.
To this day, I still catch myself trying to deal with things by myself.
It's something that is in your head, and you constantly have this battle with depression. You constantly have this battle with anxiety. But then the worst thing is when you also realize that your brain has been programmed, you still fight it, even though that's wrong.
My advice would be to talk to somebody, because it takes a bigger man to go and look for the help than it does to try to fight it. And drugs and alcohol are not the right road.
Seek professional help. This isn't something you can deal with yourself. And I hate to say it, but if you don't do that, you'll be like me. I lost 15 years of my life to fighting this thing, and I'll never get those years back. Just seek professional help.
To just take a second and pause, just for a second, and think back to when you were a boy. Think about a young boy. Take that visual representation, put it in front of you, and tell that boy everything that you wanted to be told when you were his age, when you were him. Because, believe it or not, he is worth it. And so are you.
I was diagnosed with depression, and I do have anxiety.
In 2017, I was diagnosed with having post-traumatic stress disorder, major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder.
The three main diagnoses that I got is chronic anxiety. I also have mass depression and an eating disorder.